Tekken is one of the longest-running fighting game franchises in history. Over 30 years, it's produced legendary entries, controversial experiments, and everything in between. Today, we're ranking every single Tekken game from worst to best. And we're starting with the one that kicked it all off, because ironically, that's exactly where it belongs. Tekken. Here's the thing about the original Tekken. It launched one of the biggest fighting game franchises ever made, sold over 1 million copies on PlayStation before any other game managed to do it, and it still sits dead last on this list. That's not disrespect. That's just what happens when your sequels are really, really good. Released for arcades on December 9th, 1994, Tekken ran on Namco's System 11 board, budget-friendly hardware built on PlayStation architecture. It was one of the earliest 3D polygon-based fighting games of its era, and Namco wasn't being subtle about who they were coming for. This was their direct answer to Sega's Virtua Fighter, and they didn't just study the competition, they hired it. Tekken's designer, Seiichi Ishii, had previously worked as the designer on Virtua Fighter, so Namco essentially walked into Sega's house, grabbed the guy who built their flagship fighter, and said, "Make us one of those," which is, not ideal for Sega. The gamble paid off. The PlayStation port moved 942,000 units in Japan alone during 1995, and became the first PlayStation title to cross 1 million units worldwide. For a brand new IP on a brand new console, that's absurd. The story was simple. Kazuya Mishima enters the King of Iron Fist tournament to get revenge on his father, Heihachi. Father throws son off a cliff. Son comes back angry. That one family rivalry would drive the entire franchise for the next 3 decades. Now, going back and actually playing Tekken today is a different experience entirely. The movement is stiff, the combo system barely exists, and the roster feels like a proof of concept. It's mechanically limited in ways that are impossible to ignore once you've touched literally any sequel, but none of that erases what it accomplished. This game proved that 3D fighting games weren't just viable, they were the future. Every entry on this list exists because Tekken 1 worked, but if you think the bottom of this list is reserved for games that are simply old, wait until you see what Namco did with a free-to-play experiment. Tekken Revolution. Here's a fun one. Tekken Revolution is the game on this list that you can barely play anymore. Not it's hard to find a copy, or the servers are a ghost town. Namco shut down the servers in 2017, and the online experience, which was the entire point, ceased to exist. You can still boot up the offline modes if you have it installed, but calling that playing Tekken Revolution is like calling a steering wheel a car, which is, not ideal. But before it got gutted, it spent 4 years being one of the most baffling experiments the franchise ever attempted. Released in 2013 exclusively for PlayStation 3, Tekken Revolution was Namco's big swing at the free-to-play market. Take the Tekken Tag Tournament 2 engine, strip it down, make it free, and let anyone with a PS3 jump in. Noble goal, terrible execution. Here's the thing, you needed virtual tokens just to play online ranked matches. Run out of tokens, you're done. Either wait for them to regenerate or pay real money for more. But that's not even the worst part. The game had a stat customization system where you could dump money into boosting your character's power, endurance, and vigor. So your win rate wasn't determined by how good you were at Tekken. It was determined by how thick your wallet was. A textbook pay-to-win model slapped onto a fighting game. The one genre where competitive integrity is supposed to mean something. And the content? Bare bones doesn't cover it. Local multiplayer and an arcade mode without difficulty selection. A tiny roster compared to Tag Tournament 2. Online matches you had to pay tokens for. That's the whole game. The ranking system technically tracked your win-loss ratio, but good luck climbing when the guy across from you has spent $40 inflating his stats. The funniest part? Tekken 8 launched as a full-priced premium title in 2024, and somehow shipped with more aggressive monetization than Revolution ever had. The $70 sequel found ways to nickel and dime players harder than the free game. I don't know what to tell you. Namco pulled the plug, the servers went dark, and Revolution became a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to turn a fighting game into a mobile gacha scheme. But at least Revolution was free. The next game on this list cost full price and still managed to disappoint. Tekken 2. Tekken 2 didn't just prove the first game wasn't a fluke. It proved Namco understood something about fighting games that nobody else had figured out yet. Released in arcades in 1995 and hitting the PlayStation in 1996, Tekken 2 was a substantial improvement over the original in nearly every way imaginable. The graphical facelift alone was significant. Light sourcing, rounder and more realistic character models, more fluid fighting animations. Everything looked cleaner, moved better, and felt like an actual generational leap rather than a quick cash-in sequel. For a franchise that was only a year old, this level of polish was a statement of intent. But here's the thing that makes Tekken 2 genuinely special, and it's something most people have completely forgotten about: the time release character system. This was, and I cannot stress this enough, proto DLC before the internet even existed. Here's how it worked. After Tekken 2 launched in arcades, additional characters would automatically unlock on machines over the following months. They'd show up on the idle screen, highlighted and new, tempting players to come back and try them out. The roster eventually grew to 25 characters through this system alone. No other fighting game had ever done this. No other video game, period. You'd walk into your local arcade one week and the game would literally be different from the last time you played. New fighters, new matchups, new reasons to keep feeding quarters into the machine. Namco essentially invented a dynamic content delivery system for arcade cabinets in 1995. That's genuinely ahead of its time. The PlayStation port sweetened the deal even further by including several new game modes that arcade owners couldn't access. If you were on the fence about buying a PlayStation, Tekken 2 made a pretty compelling argument. The home version wasn't just a port. It was an upgrade, and yet, despite all of this innovation, despite the graphical leap and the unprecedented content system and the expanded console features, Tekken 2 lands in the bottom half of this list. Not because it did anything wrong, it did almost everything right. The problem is that what came after it was so absurdly good that being a massive improvement over the original just isn't enough to compete. But if you think landing in the bottom half means the games ahead are only slightly better, wait until you see what Tekken 6 brought to the table. Tekken 6 didn't reinvent the wheel. It didn't need to. What it did was accidentally create the single most important mechanic in modern Tekken history, and then just kind of sat there while everyone else figured out how big a deal that was. Released in October 2009 for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, Tekken 6 was a perfectly competent fighting game. Good roster, solid mechanics, nothing that made you want to throw your controller through a wall. It was the B student of the franchise. Showed up, did the work, didn't cause any problems. But here's the thing, that B student quietly invented something that every Tekken game after it would be built around: the rage system. When your health drops below roughly 20%, your character's health bar starts glowing red, and every hit you land does significantly more damage. Which means the guy who's about to lose can suddenly delete half your health bar in a single combo if you get sloppy. It turned every match into a ticking time bomb. You could be dominating someone for 2 full rounds, get careless for 3 seconds, and watch your entire lead evaporate because your opponent landed one rage-boosted launcher. Not everyone loved it. Some players called it a necessary balancing tool that kept matches competitive. Others called it an arbitrary rubber band mechanic that punished you for playing well. But here's the kicker: every single Tekken game after Tekken 6 kept the rage system. Tekken 7 expanded it with rage arts and rage drives. Tekken 8 built its entire aggressive combat philosophy around. A mechanic that people argued about in 2009 became so fundamental to Tekken's identity that removing it now would be like removing jumping from Mario. Tekken 6 also quietly made history as the first numbered Tekken entry to land on an Xbox console. For a franchise that had been PlayStation exclusive since 1994, showing up on Microsoft's platform was a genuine cultural expansion moment. Suddenly, Tekken wasn't just a PlayStation thing anymore. It belonged to everybody. And that's kind of Tekken 6's whole deal. It's the game you respect more than you celebrate. Solid fundamentals, expanded platform reach, and one little comeback mechanic that accidentally became the heartbeat of every Tekken game that followed. Which is, you know, not a bad legacy for a B student. But if Tekken 6 played it safe, the next entry on this list did the exact opposite and paid dearly for it. Tekken 4. Tekken 4 is the game that literally made its creator's hair fall out from one side of his body. We'll get to that, but first, let's talk about why. Released in 2000 2002 for arcades and then ported to PlayStation 2, Tekken 4 had one genuinely ambitious idea: interactive stages. For the first time in the series, arenas had walls, pillars, ceilings, and uneven terrain that players could use for tactical advantage and extra damage. On paper, this sounds incredible. In practice, it broke everything. The game engine was completely retooled to prioritize environmental interaction, which meant characters moved slower and more fluidly than anything before it. The signature Tekken speed was just gone. Competitive players who had spent years developing muscle memory and timing patterns suddenly found themselves wading through molasses while a pillar decided the outcome of their match. Stage design became more important than character skill. Uneven surfaces made consistent gameplay patterns impossible to develop. You could be the best Jin player on the planet and still lose, because you got cornered against a wall in a parking garage. Here's the thing, the game sold well. Commercially, Tekken 4 was fine, but the critical reception was brutal. It pulled some of the worst review scores of any numbered Tekken entry on Metacritic, and the community response was even harsher. Players hated it, pros rejected it. The competitive scene basically pretended it didn't exist, and nobody felt that rejection more than series producer Katsuhiro Harada. The backlash created such intense stress that Harada developed a mysterious medical condition where hair fell out exclusively from the right side of his body, his arms, his eyebrows, his eyelashes, just the right side. The left side was completely fine, which is, not ideal. The man was literally falling apart asymmetrically because people didn't like his video game. He later said he didn't have a single ally during that period. The pressure got so bad that he actually left Namco entirely for about a year before Tekken 5 development even began. That might be the most dramatic consequence of a bad game review in the entire history of the industry. A man's body rejected a fighting game one half at a time. The cruel irony is that Tekken 4's ideas weren't terrible. Environmental interaction in fighting games is now standard. Walls are a core mechanic in modern Tekken, but the implementation in 2002 was catastrophic, and it proved something the industry keeps having to relearn. Commercial success and actual quality are not the same thing, but if Tekken 4 nearly killed the franchise, the next entry on this list proves it could still throw a party. A very, very big one. Tekken Tag Tournament 2. 60 characters. Let that number sit for a second. 60 playable fighters in a single fighting game. That's not a roster, that's a phone book. And somehow, Tekken Tag Tournament 2 managed to ship every single one of them starting in 2011 across arcades, then PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 without the disc physically catching fire. Here's the thing about Tag Tournament 2. It was non-canonical. None of it mattered to the main Tekken storyline, and that's exactly what made it special. Without the burden of pushing the Mishima family soap opera forward, the developers were free to do one thing only: go absolutely wild with the gameplay. The tag mechanics from the original got a complete overhaul. Extended tag combos, combined moves, entirely new offensive systems that didn't exist in any other Tekken game. You could switch fighters at any point during a match, and your inactive character would gradually recover lost health on the sideline. Victory came when both of your opponent's fighters lost their full life bars, which meant team composition and switching strategy mattered just as much as raw execution. It wasn't just pick two characters you like, it was build a team that actually functions together. And the roster. Good lord, the roster. 60 characters meant that basically every fighter who had ever appeared in a Tekken game was accounted for. A love letter to the entire franchise. If your favorite character existed in Tekken at any point, they were probably here. But here's where it gets complicated. 60 characters is generous. Maybe too generous. Balancing that many fighters for competitive play is like trying to juggle bowling pins while riding a unicycle on a tightrope over a volcano. Some matchups were nightmares. Some team compositions broke the game in ways no patch could fully address. And because the whole thing was non-canonical, the competitive scene never quite took it seriously the way they did with numbered entries. Tournament organizers looked at Tag 2 and said, this is cool, but we're running Tekken 6 brackets, which is a shame, because underneath the chaos of 60 characters and infinite team combinations was a genuinely deep fighting game that rewarded creative play. The people who stuck with it, who learned the tag combos and mastered the switching mechanics, they'll tell you it's one of the best Tekken experiences ever made. They're not wrong. It's just that best experience and best competitive title aren't aren't always the same thing. Tag Tournament 2 is the game the developers clearly loved making. You can feel it in every corner of that absurd roster. It just couldn't quite translate all that passion into competitive legitimacy, which, you know, is a little bittersweet. But if Tag 2 was the franchise at its most generous, the next entry was the franchise at its most focused. Tekken 7, 7 years. In an era where most games are lucky to hold a player base for 7 months, Tekken 7 stayed competitively relevant for 7 straight years. This is a franchise that nearly died with Tekken 4, got publicly embarrassed by Revolution, and then came back with a game so solid that major tournaments kept running Tekken 7 brackets all the way until Tekken 8 dropped in January 2024. Here's the thing, Tekken 7 didn't just survive, it modernized the entire franchise for the esports era by rethinking almost every core system from the ground up. Let's start with Power Crush. These were moves that let your character absorb damage from mid and high attacks while continuing their own attack sequence. You'd take the hit, sure, but you wouldn't flinch. This created an entirely new layer of defensive counterplay that previous Tekken games simply didn't have. Suddenly, you couldn't just pressure someone endlessly without thinking about whether they were about to eat your kick and punch you in the mouth anyway. Then, there's the Rage system overhaul. Tekken 6 introduced Rage, but Tekken 7 turned it into something genuinely strategic. Rage arts were flashy, cinematic super moves that consumed your Rage status in one dramatic burst. Rage drives were the more interesting addition, basically modified versions of regular moves that opened up new combo extensions. Blow your Rage on one big hit, or use it to extend pressure and create openings. That decision point alone added massive depth to every single round. The combo system got a complete rebuild too. The bound system from Tekken 6 and Tag 2 was gone. In its place, Tekken 7 introduced Kirimomi or aerial tailspin. Screw moves would send juggled opponents spinning through the air before landing in a vulnerable slump state, giving you a window for additional combo damage. It looked incredible, and it felt even better to execute. But the real showstopper was the cinematic presentation. Wall bounce mechanics gave certain moves devastating pushback properties near walls. And then there were the slow motion effects, when both characters threw attacks simultaneously, and either one could be knocked out by the next hit. The game would dynamically slow down, the camera would tighten, and suddenly every person in a tournament venue was holding their breath, fighting game theater at its absolute best. Tekken 7 released on June 2nd, 2017 for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC via Steam after an extended arcade run, and it just kept going. Multiple seasons of DLC characters, significant balance patches, constant competitive support. This was the game that proved Tekken belonged alongside Street Fighter as a permanent fixture of competitive fighting games. Not a guest, not a secondary option, a pillar. After everything the franchise went through to get here, that feels pretty earned. But if Tekken 7 proved the franchise could dominate the modern era, the game that first showed Tekken could think outside the box came much earlier. Tekken Tag Tournament for millions of people, this was literally the first game they ever played on PlayStation 2. Not Tekken 3, not a numbered sequel, not even a canonical entry, a spin-off, and it might have mattered more than half the mainline games combined. Tekken Tag Tournament hit arcades in 1999 before launching as a PS2 launch title in North America and Europe in 2000, and its timing was absolutely perfect. The PlayStation 2 was the most anticipated console on the planet, and the game sitting right there on day one was a 2-on-2 tag team fighter packed with nearly every character the franchise had ever produced. If you were a Tekken veteran, your entire roster was waiting for you. If you were a newcomer who just bought a shiny new console and needed something to play, congratulations. You picked up a fighting game with zero story baggage and the most accessible entry point the series had ever offered. Here's the thing. Because Tekken Tag Tournament was explicitly non-canonical, the developers didn't have to worry about storylines, character arcs, or making sure the timeline made sense. They could focus entirely on making the game feel incredible to play. And they did. The tag mechanic changed everything. This wasn't just pick two characters and hope for the best. You had to think about individual character skill, sure, but also team synergy. Which fighters complemented each other's weaknesses? Which matchups gave you an edge when your opponent tagged in their second pick? When was the right moment to switch out, recover health on your resting fighter, and bring in someone fresh? It added layers of strategic depth that traditional one-on-one Tekken simply didn't have. You weren't just playing a fighting game anymore. You were managing a roster. The tag-in and tag-out system created these tactical windows that fundamentally altered how rounds played out. A well-timed switch could save a nearly dead fighter, bait an opponent into overcommitting, or set up devastating combos that chained both characters' movesets together. It felt revolutionary at the time because, well, it kind of was. But what really makes Tekken Tag Tournament special is the cultural footprint. This was the gateway drug. Millions of players who had never touched a Tekken game in their lives picked this up because it came with their PS2, fell in love with the roster, and became lifelong fans of the franchise. That's not something most spin-offs can claim. Most spin-offs get forgotten. This one built an entire generation of players, and its influence didn't stop at the PS2 launch window. The success of the tag system led directly to Tekken Tag Tournament 2 over a decade later, and shaped how developers across the industry thought about team-based fighting game design for years. A non-canonical arcade spin-off accidentally became one of the most important entries in the entire franchise, which is, not ideal if you're a numbered sequel trying to justify your existence. But if you think a beloved spin-off climbing this high is impressive, wait until you see where the newest entry in the series lands. Tekken 8. Tekken 8 walked into the room on January 26th, 2024, looked at every defensive player in the community, and said that era is over, and it meant it. Here's the thing about Tekken 8. Every fighting game sequel tweaks the formula. A new mechanic here, a balance patch there. Tekken 8 didn't tweak anything. It rebuilt the entire combat philosophy from the ground up around one core idea: aggression wins. The game actively punishes you for sitting back and blocking, rewarding players who push forward, take risks, and stay in their opponent's face. If you spent the last decade perfecting your turtle game in Tekken 7, congratulations. That skill set is now about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. The base roster launched with 32 characters, balancing franchise staples with new additions specifically designed for competitive integrity. And the competitive scene noticed immediately. This wasn't a roster built for nostalgia. It was built for balance. Every character feels like they belong, which is harder to pull off than it sounds when you're juggling 30 years of fan favorites, and everyone has a personal vendetta if their main gets cut. But the real surprise isn't the combat system, it's Arcade Quest, a single-player mode where you create a custom avatar and visit different in-game arcades, leveling up against increasingly difficult opponents in a structure that mirrors how people actually got into competitive fighting games. You walk into an arcade, you get destroyed, you learn one thing, you come back, you get destroyed slightly less. Repeat until you're the one doing the destroying. It's basically the fighting game onboarding experience the genre has needed for 2 decades, and nobody thought to build it until now. A fighting game that teaches you how to play it. Revolutionary concept, apparently. Cross-platform play across PlayStation 5, Xbox Series XS, and PEC means the competitive pool is massive from day one. No more hardware tribalism, splitting the player base. You want to fight someone? You fight them. Doesn't matter what box they bought, which is, how it should have always worked. Now, the monetization conversation. Tekken 8 technically has more paid content than Tekken Revolution did. Let that sink in. A full-priced premium title with more purchasable content than a free-to-play game. But here's the kicker. Nobody really cares. And the reason nobody cares is because everything is cosmetic. That's like you're buying outfits, not stat boosts. Want your character to wear a silly hat during a ranked match? Pay up. Want to actually win that ranked match? Get good. That distinction matters more than people realize, and it's exactly why Tekken 8 avoids the backlash that buried Revolution. Tekken 8 is the current king. It's gorgeous, it's aggressive, it's mechanically tight, and it genuinely respects new players enough to teach them the game instead of throwing them into the deep end with concrete shoes. That's an absurdly rare combination, but being the current king means competing against 30 years of nostalgia, and nostalgia is undefeated in these conversations. Which brings us to a game that didn't just compete with nostalgia, it created it. Tekken 5. Tekken 4 literally made Katsuhiro Harada's hair fall out. That's not a metaphor. The stress from the backlash was so severe that hair started falling off exclusively from the right side of his body. His arms, his eyebrows, his eyelashes. The man who built Tekken was physically deteriorating because of how badly Tekken 4 was received. He left Namco for an entire year, didn't have a single ally at the company, just walked away, and then he came back. Here's the thing about Tekken 5. This isn't just a good game. This is a revenge story. Harada returned to Namco with one objective: prove that Tekken still worked, that the franchise franchise wasn't broken, that Tekken 4 was a detour, not a destination, and he did exactly that. Released in arcades on November 15, 2004, and ported to PlayStation 2 on February 24, 2005, Tekken 5 landed right on the franchise's 10th anniversary. The timing couldn't have been more poetic. 10 years of Tekken, and the series needed saving more than ever. The game stripped away everything that made Tekken 4 frustrating. The slow movement, the uneven terrain, the stage gimmicks that decided matches more than player skill. All of it gone. Tekken 5 went back to what worked and then refined it until it shined. The story introduced Jinpachi Mishima as the new antagonist taking over the Mishima Zaibatsu, with a side story following Jin Kazama fighting G Corporation enemies. The Mishima family drama continued to escalate, which is impressive considering it was already at throwing your son off a cliff levels of dysfunction. But the narrative was secondary to the real achievement here. The gameplay felt like Tekken again. The competitive community noticed immediately. Tournament players who had abandoned the series after Tekken 4 came back. Local scenes that had dried up started running brackets again. Tekken 5 wasn't just a return to form, it was a full-blown resurrection, and Namco wasn't done. Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection hit Japanese arcades in December 2005, then North America in February 2006, then PSP later that year, then PlayStation 3 via PlayStation Network in 2007 with 1080p resolution support. That's 4 platforms across 3 years. Namco was determined to get this game into every pair of hands they could reach. Dark Resurrection refined the competitive balance, improved the graphics to match the arcade version, and polished character representation until the whole package gleamed. The message was clear: we messed up. We know we messed up. Here's the proof that we fixed it, and the fighting game community accepted it. Tekken 5 rehabilitated the franchise's reputation so thoroughly that it paved the road for Tekken 6, Tekken 7, and ultimately Tekken 8. Every good thing that happened to this series after 2004 traces back to Harada walking into Namco after a year away and deciding to build the game that would save everything. That's a Rocky story. Beaten down, nearly broken, coming back stronger than before. It's genuinely one of the most satisfying redemption arcs in gaming history, and the game itself earned every bit of that praise. But despite all of that, despite the comeback, despite the legacy, despite literally saving the franchise from irrelevance, Tekken 5 still isn't number 1, because the game sitting above it didn't just save Tekken, it defined it. Tekken 3, you knew it was coming. Everybody knew it was coming. And honestly, if it didn't end up here, you'd have every right to close this video and never trust me again. Tekken 3 hit arcades in 1997, landed on PlayStation in 1998, and proceeded to sell over 8 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling PlayStation games of all time. Not best-selling fighting games, best-selling PlayStation games, period. 3 decades later, it still sits at the top of virtually every community ranking, every retrospective tier list, every greatest fighting games ever made conversation. And here's the thing that makes that genuinely remarkable. It's not just nostalgia. People go back and replay Tekken 3 expecting rose-tinted glasses to shatter, and instead, they find a game that still feels incredible. So how does a 1997 game hold the crown over entries with 30 years more technology, bigger budgets, and online infrastructure? Because Tekken 3 got everything right at the same time. That almost never happens. Let's start with the roster. 15 new characters were added, replacing 17 from Tekken 2. That's not a minor refresh. That's gutting the majority of your lineup and betting the entire franchise on new blood. And it worked. The new fighters brought completely different playstyles, while maintaining enough franchise DNA that veteran players didn't feel abandoned. It was a roster that felt both fresh and familiar, which is an absurdly difficult balance to strike. The graphics were a clear generational leap. Smoother animations, more detailed character models, stages that actually looked like places rather than flat arenas with wallpaper. For 1998, this was genuinely impressive. For a PlayStation 1 game, it bordered on witchcraft, but the real magic was in how it played. The core fighting engine was tight, responsive, and deep enough for competitive players while remaining accessible enough that your friend who button mashed could still have a good time. That accessibility without sacrificing depth is the holy grail of fighting game design, and Tekken 3 nailed it like it was easy, which, to be clear, it is not. And then there's Tekken Ball, a one-on-one beach volleyball mode where you punch and kick a ball at your opponent to deal damage. 3 difficulty levels: Beach Ball for beginners at 60% damage, Gumball for experts at 80%, and Iron Ball for absolute psychopaths at 100%. It had zero reason to exist. It added nothing to competitive viability. It was perfect. Sometimes a fighting game just needs a mode where you spike a volleyball into someone's face with a spinning heel kick, and Tekken 3 understood that on a spiritual level. Critics at the time called it a landmark title. The community has spent 3 decades agreeing with them. It wasn't just the best Tekken game when it released. It wasn't just the best fighting game on PlayStation. It was, and for many people still is, the single greatest fighting game ever made. 8 million copies, 30 years of unbroken consensus, a roster refresh that became the gold standard, a fighting engine that still holds up, and a volleyball mode that nobody asked for, but everybody loved. That's not nostalgia talk. That's just a game that was built different. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.